Order, please. I'm going to call this meeting to order. So this is the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. And the committee mandate, I'm going to read it out, is the Public Accounts Committee is established for the purpose of reviewing the public accounts, the annual report or other report of the Auditor General, and any other financial matters respecting the public funds of the province. My name is Susan LeBlanc. I'm the MLA for Dartmouth North, and I'm the chair of the committee. And just before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please put your phones on silent. And if there is an emergency and we need to leave the building, we're supposed to exit through the Granville Street doors and then gather at the Grand Parade. So I'm going to begin by asking the members, committee members, to introduce yourselves. Please say your name, your constituency, and your pronouns. And I'll begin with the member closest to me on the left.
Good morning. My name is Marco McLeod. I'm the MLA for Pictou West. He, him.
Good morning. I'm Rick Burns, MLA for Hammonds Plains Lucasville. He, him.
Good morning. Tom Taggart, MLA for Colchester North and MLA Taggart.
Good morning. Tim Outfit from Bedford Basin. He, him, or Tim?
Good morning. Derek Mumbercat, MLA for City Member 2. He, him.
Diane Timmins, MLA for Victoria Lakes, and she, her.
Thank you very much. And we also have officials from the Legislative Council Office and the Legislative Committee's Office also in attendance. And on today's agenda, we have officials with us from the Department of Advanced Education with respect to the 2025 report of the Auditor General funding to universities. So I'd like to ask the witnesses to introduce themselves, beginning with the witness on the far left. I don't know who's left. And if you'd like to include your pronouns, that would be great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Cheryl Toe. I'm the Executive Director for Programs and Accountability at the Department of Advanced Education, and I use she, her pronouns.
Good morning, everybody. Tracey Barbrick, the Deputy Minister of Education and Early Childhood and Advanced Education, and she, her.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'd like to now invite Deputy Barbrick, to make opening remarks. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us here today. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about the Auditor General's report, which we'll do for the next couple of hours. We welcome the performance audit carried out by the Auditor General and are confident that our journey to enhance accountability is moving us in the right direction. We have 10 incredible universities in this province, all of which offer unique and top-notch student experiences and academic programming. Universities are critical to the economic and social prosperity of our province. In particular, universities play an essential role in training the workforce of today and tomorrow. Healthcare professionals to care for our loved ones, teachers to educate our children, engineers to ensure we have high-quality infrastructure and supports, musicians and artists to inspire us, and lawyers to uphold justice, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, it's crucial that we are making smart, sustainable investments in our people and our institutions. The province provides more than $380 million in operating grant funding annually to Nova Scotia's 10 universities, more than $43 million in targeted funding for specific programming, approximately $24 million to universities to offset tuition costs for Nova Scotia students through the University Student Bursary Program, and more than $250 million in provincial and federal loans and grants to approximately 9,000 Nova Scotia students annually. That's a $697 million annual investment in our post-secondary system. Part of making smart and sustainable investments is making sure Nova Scotia's public-funded universities are attractive, accessible, affordable, and sustainable for generations to come. There was a lot of debate in this House session about finding the right balance between accountability to the investors and university independence. Nova Scotia and every province across the country are trying to find that balance. Last year, we introduced one-year bilateral funding agreements between the province and each university. These agreements increase the accountability to ensure we are supporting students, realizing our shared vision of a strong economy and workforce, and maximizing and protecting public investments. We can confidently say that the bilateral agreements have been successful and increasing accountability in the sector. We are now looking forward to continuing this framework in the next bilateral agreement with a focus on financial benchmarks, filling seats in health-related programs, tying performance-based funding to student housing, and working with universities to ensure that programs reflect the needs of the future. These new agreements have been circulated to universities, and we look forward to sharing more once they've been finalized. We put a lot of focus on accountability measures, which we know are important, but it's also important to celebrate the shared successes that reflect the province's investment and the university's leadership. Each institution is doing excellent work that showcases what we can accomplish together. I'm proud to say that much of this innovation responds to Nova Scotia's needs for skilled and specialized workers. Dalhousie University now offers Atlantic Canada's first Masters of Nursing in Mental Health and Addictions. Mount St. Vincent just announced a new doctoral psychology program and training clinic with a focus on the needs of children and youth. Cape Breton University's medical school campus is on track to open this fall with 30 seats. We have also invested in a new state-of-the-art nurse training facility at Acadia University that supports the introduction of a new nursing program. NSCAT University students recently used their intuitive design skills to evaluate communications about the province's colon cancer prevention program. Their recommendations to improve the design, language, and methods are already being implemented with real potential to save actual lives. St. Francis Xavier University has seen great success with their 2-year accelerated nursing program. St. Mary's has launched a professional master's in applied health services research. Teaching is also a pressing workforce need, with accelerated online and cohort-based Bachelor of Education programs are being implemented in many universities. University St. Anne, Nova Scotia's French University, is offering a 16-month condensed Bachelor of Education starting this September. We are also seeing innovation to fill housing gaps across the province. Last year, the Atlantic School of Theology completed renovations to their student accommodations. They can now accommodate 103 students from surrounding schools, not just the Atlantic School of Theology, Dalhousie, NSCAT, St. Mary's, NSCC, and King's. The University of King's College is also moving forward with its plans to redevelop the southeast corner of the campus and plans for a brand new multi-use building, including residence capacity that will double their affordable housing options. As you can see, universities play a major role in our economy and training our future workforce. We need a strong partnership to continue to meet the needs of Nova Scotia. We appreciate the work of the Auditor General and her team. The report being considered today provides recommendations that are consistent with the direction that the department has been headed over the last year, but before the impacts of the bilateral agreements had had a chance to be fully realized. Through the bilateral funding agreements, we continue to advance accountabilities for public funds to support university financial sustainability. I want to close by thanking the universities. They play an important role in this province, and we greatly value the work that they do. We look forward to continuing the important relationships we have with them as we work together to offer post-secondary students the education that they need and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Barbrick. And so I will remind the committee that we're going to go caucus by caucus for questioning today, as opposed to when we're in camera. And so we'll begin, every caucus will begin with a 20-minute question period, and then following that, we will divide up, or I will divide up the remaining time, and I'll let you know then. So before we go to the NDP Caucus, I'd like to ask our newest member of the committee to introduce himself.
Thank you, Chair. Paul Wozni, MLA Sackville-Cobequid. I use he, him pronouns.
Thank you, MLA Wozni. And so now you can begin with your 20 minutes. Go ahead. Mr. Wozni.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Deputy Minister for her remarks. The Auditor General's report found that the department was not effectively using its existing powers under the Universities and Accountability Sustainability Act. Why was the decision made to increase power for the minister to trigger a revitalization plan and dictate to universities throughout the revitalization process? What other options were considered that would have seen the existing act used more effectively?
Deputy Barbrick.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the journey to accountability for the public investment, which really is the better part of $700 million, it has multiple levers. The bilateral agreements that started a year ago were recognizing that the relationship with each university is unique. So prior to that, there had been a 5-year MOU that was between the provincial government and all the 10 post-secondary institutions or universities as a block. So the recognition was that there really is unique offerings and relationships with each of the universities. So that started that journey. And those bilateral agreements included a stepped-up level of accountability from agreements in past, with the ability to provide holdbacks, financial holdbacks, if things weren't delivered. And I'm pleased to report that 24-25 funds were all able to be released because every university met the requirements. So in that recognition of a whole suite of things to support accountability, the previous Sustainability Act that was created in around 2015 left it up to the universities to identify themselves when they needed to trigger a revitalization exercise. It did not provide the government the opportunity to monitor performance over time around financial condition and other things, and if we got into trouble there, to trigger that revitalization, as can sometimes be required and has been in some other provinces. So the creation of Bill 12 is really one of many of kind of tools in the toolkit as we move forward with accountability across the post-secondary institutions to be there if it's needed. It's also recognized that for universities to trigger themselves a revitalization exercise, there is a brand worry about that for a university if they're going to say to the world, we need to revitalize ourselves. So really difficult for a board of governors to make the decision that they're going to go down that path. So what we've provided there is the opportunity, which would be a last-ditch effort if it was required after all of the things that are in place, that at the end of the day, if we've got a university that was tracking to instability such that viability was coming into question over time, then we would have an opportunity to pull a trigger on a revitalization exercise if we had to. It would be a last-ditch effort. So lots of things we put in place in legislation is enabling authority in the event that we ever need it. But that's not where we intend to start, and it would be after a very long path.
MLA Wasney?
Thank you for that. One of the shortcomings identified in university funding on the part of the department by the Auditor General was the near total absence of specific cost estimates required by the department for the funding that it grants. And there has been some signal from the department that it will begin to require detailed cost estimates prior to determining program grants on a go forward. What can you tell the committee about the standardized process or form that is being developed and implemented to ensure that the department is provided with detailed cost estimates as a necessary aspect of transparency for public funds invested in post-secondary education?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Yes, absolutely. The Auditor General provided some recommendations and commentary on there have been times where in our enthusiasm to move desperately needed projects, most of them health-related, after a lack of investment for a long time. So there was some things right off the bat we wanted to do with universities to make sure that we had the workforce that we needed. So there was a number of initiatives that were triggered quite quickly to try to make sure we had a workforce when we had desperate gaps that really had been a lack of attention for way too long. So the Auditor General certainly made comments about in your enthusiasm to move these really important projects forward, there were some advanced steps missed on fully developing a business proposal. So we've put a number of pieces in place. I'm actually going to turn this to Cheryl, if that's okay, who is both our kind of expert in this space as well as an accountant.
Ms. Tell?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So as the deputy has noted, the department does work collaboratively on a number of projects or initiatives with universities as well as other key partners. They do provide high-quality education to students once they graduate and to meet labor market needs of Nova Scotia. The department has traditionally required detailed cost estimates and will continue to do so. These estimates will be reviewed by staff in the department, and clarifying questions will be submitted back to the institution for answering. The staff will complete the analysis, which will be documented with a recommendation regarding the project. We since have implemented a more thorough tracking method for all of our proposals. I think one of the elements working with the Auditor General's team is, with turnover in staff, there was an inability to demonstrate sometimes the cost estimates provided or the analysis done on the work by the team. And so we've implemented several measures to correct that, including standardizing a general email account where all, proposals and documentation reporting by our institutions will be captured. And then there is now a systematic approach to tracking all the work that's been done by the team in assessing proposals.
MLA Wozni.
Continuing kind of on this track, the Auditor General, definitely raised concerns about the lack of specific planning connected to what in effect are government priorities around, especially healthcare programs and investments. But it also flagged a lack of rigor in the department's approach to requiring detailed cost estimates for general operating grants. So while there are some issues with sort of special projects, and there's some substantial costs attached to that for government, but the general operating grants also are an issue in terms of the department failing on an ongoing basis. And it's not a limited window. Really, the period of the audit covers a series of years where the department did not require in providing operating grants to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not a new problem or a new dynamic. It did not require specific cost estimates on those either. So the department, has dropped the ball on ensuring accountability of public funds in a number of respects, from not adequately defining and monitoring the financial health of institutions to not including terms and conditions on funding agreements, either under the previous MOU and even under the recently implemented bilateral agreements. Wouldn't it have been enough to address these shortcomings without extending the department's powers to influence the structure and priorities of universities?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thank you for the question. So, again, I think the multi-pronged approach that has to happen when it comes to accountability for the better part of about $700 million. So the bilaterals and the Auditor General recognized that pending the opportunity for the bilateral approach to kind of be realized, the audit started before year one of the bilateral approach was completed, and she recognized in her report that this is a step in the right direction. And among those things, which I will talk about a little bit, were the development of clear financial indicators so that we and the universities in our partnership are looking at the same metrics as it relates to the question of how are these schools doing? Are they sustainable? Are we tracking both their kind of cash flow as well as their overall kind of financial statements around assets. So that piece, I'm going to actually ask Cheryl if she can fill in some gaps around that piece, because we have worked collaboratively with the universities over the last 7-8 months to land on financial indicators that we are all going to use collectively around kind of the overall health of the organization. Step one in all of this is to make sure, and the universities want this, we deal with the presidents regularly, they want clarity around how we're all measuring success for these organizations. They too don't want to be kind of one of arrangements on kind of various investments and efforts. So the piece on, if it's okay, Cheryl can highlight specifically some of the financial indicators that we've agreed on with the universities that we're going to use to kind of monitor and measure those things. Is that okay? Yeah. Good.
Ms. Toh?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as the Deputy has alluded to, we have been working really closely with our universities this past year on a Financial and Sustainability and Accountability Committee, which was developed and agreed to in the 24-25 bilateral agreements. So these committees include senior financial leaders from all of our 10 universities, as well as representatives from the department. So one of the big focuses this past year has been developing financial indicators and benchmarks to help the department assess the financial health of our institutions. So I'm pleased to say that we have agreed to 6 financial health indicators, and as well has agreed to 6 benchmarks. So the first financial health indicator is net income loss ratio. So this is calculated by taking the total revenue minus the total expenditures divided by total revenue. And the purpose of this indicator is to measure the percentage of an institution's revenues that contribute to net assets. So a negative value would indicate that revenues are not covering expenses. For Nova Scotia, the benchmark that we have indicated is they need to meet a 1.5% or higher threshold. The second financial health indicator is the net operating revenues ratio. This is calculated by taking the cash flow from operating and dividing it by total revenues. The purpose of this indicator is to indicate the cash flow from operating activities as a proportion of revenues. As members are aware, our institutions have many inflows of revenues, not just operating. So they do have, special purpose funds, endowment funds from donors. So this is really focused on the cash flow from operating activities. And the Nova Scotia benchmark is 5% or above. The third financial health indicator is the primary reserve. This is calculated by taking expendable net assets and dividing it by total expenditures times 365 days. The purpose of this indicator is to calculate the number of days an institution could function using its unrestricted assets, assuming there is no other sources of revenue. The Nova Scotia benchmark that we have agreed to is 30 days or more. The fourth financial health indicator is interest burden ratio. This is calculated by taking the interest expense and dividing it by total expense minus depreciation. The purpose of this indicator is to really understand the proportion of total expenses that are supporting the annual cost of servicing debt. The Nova Scotia benchmark that we've agreed to is 3% or above. The fifth financial health indicator is the viability ratio. This is calculated by taking expendable net assets and dividing it by long-term debt. The purpose of this ratio is to understand the proportion of long-term debt that could be settled using unrestricted assets of the university. The Nova Scotia benchmark that we have agreed to is 30% or above. And then the last ratio indicator that we have discussed and agreed to with universities is the in-year surplus and or deficit. So this is calculated by taking the total revenue of university and subtracting the total expenditures. This really demonstrates the university's bottom line from the audited financial statements. And then just to clarify, all of these figures will be coming from the audited financial statements of the university. And then, of course, the Nova Scotia benchmark, of course, we'd like to see them break even on an annual basis. The one item that I just did want to flag for the committee and just provide a little bit more information on is the expendable net assets component or element because it's certainly used in a number of the indicators. So the expendable net assets represents the assets an institution has readily available and can use to cover its expenses and obligations. So this does include typically unrestricted net assets, so assets that the institution can use for any purpose, and internally restricted net assets. So a number of our institutions have assets that the institution has set aside for specific purposes, but the restrictions are self-imposed by the board and not externally restricted by donors. So expendable net assets is an important indicator as well because it's an indicator of an institution's financial health and its ability to meet its obligations. I would also like to share in the last 24, 25 bilateral agreements, certainly, appreciate the committee members' comments about accountability. So I think we have enhanced the accountability for the sector in the sense that we have outlined in the 23-24 bilateral agreements, highlighting where government parties are and where we feel that perhaps the institutions could contribute to the economy of Nova Scotia. So for some of the, again, priority areas, the province has highlighted a number of, general categories that we have asked institutions to respond to and identify through their strategic alignment proposal or plan how they plan to advance some of these government priorities. So, for example, in the strategic alignment proposal, in the bilateral agreement, we identified action for health. So the province is, of course, focused on creating an efficient, modern, equitable, and respectful healthcare system. We'd like universities to help with improving the standard of living in Nova Scotia. We know that one of the best ways in Canada is improving the standard of living is really ensuring we have high-quality post-secondary education system where students can thrive and learn. We have identified increasing the overall productivity of Nova Scotia as a priority. One of the ways, we can improve the standard of living in Nova Scotia is to increase our overall productivity, either that's through technological advances or by enhancing the skills of our labor force. And then also the department did highlight, a number of, I think, key priorities for the post-secondary education system, which I think are really I would say shared priorities with our universities. So some examples are, Nova Scotia does have a student-centered post-secondary education system where all learners thrive. So, in practice, this means, addressing students' mental wellness and health and social development and housing needs, ensuring students have access to programs and services to help them to enter and complete their studies. Again, another shared priority with the sector is Nova Scotia has a high-quality, relevant, accountable, and sustainable post-secondary education system. So again, these are just examples of some of the priorities that we have highlighted in the bilateral agreement. And then we asked each of our universities to respond, again, understanding that they all have unique offerings and provide unique programming. And so we offered them an opportunity to provide a strategic alignment plan to the department, identifying how they were going to achieve the priorities that we have outlined in the bilateral agreement. And we left that up to them. So again, as independent institutions, they all, have their own strengths. And I'm pleased to say they all came to the table with identifying various actions to meet government priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. MLA Wozni with 45 seconds.
The Auditor General flagged that the department had no regular interval of review of the financial health of universities. Given the measures, the financial indicators that have been agreed to with universities, how often will the department assess the financial health of universities, and how will it standardize a timeline and process for assessing and reporting financial health of universities?
Deputy Barbrick with 15 seconds.
Thank you. So they'll be required under the next bilateral to report those on a quarterly forecast. So the same as government does for our own. So we're really mirroring the practice, how government reports to Treasury Board in terms of our forecast management for the universities in the same spirit.
Order. The time for the NDP Caucus has elapsed. Now we'll go on to the Liberal Caucus for 20 minutes. So I recognize MLA Mombercat.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, and thank you for being here. I'm going to be asking a whole bunch of stuff all over the place, but couple of different things about the health and viability of universities, but also, Bill 12 was a big conversation during the legislature, and some of the issues highlighted in the report have been addressed by Bill 12 to ensure there's more accountability. There's more accountability to any overspending by universities. However, many of the staff and the students and university administrators have voiced concerns about other aspects of that bill, and some of them describing it as government overreach. So I really kind of want your comments on that. Like, that was something that was a big part of what we heard from the university sector and people who were concerned about academic freedom. They were concerned about the ability for really the minister to have these powers that he could go in and make decisions, appoint half of the board. There's a number of things within the bill, so I would appreciate your comments, Deputy, on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Deputy Barbrick, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. In my opening remarks, I commented on this balance because this is funny business. If we're not requiring enough accountability, we failed on that side. If we kind of require too much accountability, we're overreaching. So, this is this balance for a very large investment on behalf of Nova Scotian taxpayers and trying to achieve the right balance. So the Bill 12 certainly, I think, caught into a large kind of global swirl on kind of some of those concepts, and it garnered certainly attention in that space. So we're trying to find the balance. So the purpose of the bilateral and the Auditor General's comments were, you are requiring insufficient accountability for this size of investment. We knew that needed attention, and the work had already started with the bilaterals and will continue into the future. And then you deal with this tension between, not so different than any kind of government and service delivery or third-party agency that for whom government provides a lot of funding. There's always this tension around where does control sit, where does a lack of accountability sit, and we're always trying to kind of weave our way in there, and that's the case here. So Bill 12 basically was intending to recognize that this is a large investment for the province. Sustainability for a larger per capita university sector than any province in the country requires lots of attention and recognition to all the universities around the many, many ways that they're collaborating with each other, either in service delivery or 2+2 degree programs. Nova Scotia is ahead of the national game in how our universities collaborate together, recognizing that they all have different assets. So Bill 12 was intended to put some pins in place to allow us to ensure that accountability is there, that students are protected, because the notion that any of these universities fail when students are investing in an education, and parents, as the one that has one that's just graduating from university, that we need to have the mechanisms in place that if things fall down, we know when to pull the trigger. So clarity around performance indicators, clarity around what we need, and ensuring that programs are well utilized, that we're not kind of operating courses that have a very low enrollment, that it's kind of indicating that this is not what young people or students are looking for, and that when things at the end of the day, if we've done all those right things that the Auditor General and others in terms of accountability want us to do, and if things are still not where we need them, we need to have some mechanisms to protect students and taxpayers in the province. So Bill 12 threads in some things that allows us to have up to 50% of the board regulations to be developed in collaboration with every university, reflecting their uniqueness. So the Atlantic School of Theology, of course, has a different context than Dalhousie has. So the regulations will be customized up to 50%, ensuring that there's good governance best practice, that there's risk management plans, that there's clear financial indicators, that we're all looking at the same thing. And if we need to, at the end of the day, the revitalize exercise, which happens in kind of private corporations when it has to, we would be able to do that. In the Act, even the Act that was released in 2015, there's very clear parameters around what a revitalization exercise is. It's well defined. So the only thing that's changed with Bill 12 is we have given the minister the opportunity to trigger that if everything else has failed. That would be a last effort. So first, we get our house in order. We make sure we're talking about clear parameters. We're clear with what we need. The universities and the department are in close contact. I think I've spoken with 4 university presidents in the last 24 hours. So like that it's high contact. And if at the end of the day we can't do all the things we need together, we need to have a way to adjust. So that's really the provisions of Bill 12. I know it created lots of tension. It is the tension between accountability and independence.
MLA Membercat?
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I think this is one of the important parts of this committee is that we get a chance to ask yourself and your staff these questions. And I go to the viability piece, and you know, in the report from the Auditor General, it talks about debt per student, which some of it is high, higher in some spots than others. We know that international students that have been coming here, those numbers are going to decline. In some cases, very much so. We also, in the Auditor General's report, which is something that I don't think people talk about enough, is deferred maintenance. So like these universities, from what we gather, some of them have deferred infrastructure projects within which the Auditor General flagged as potential for concern around you know, the age of infrastructure and ensuring that safety is not an issue. So all that being said, and in your comments about Bill 12, is there a concern that any of the institutions are at the point where you need to trigger a viability exercise with them?
I recognize Deputy Barbrick.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. The Auditor General did a great job of pulling apart the distinction between cash flow, kind of operating costs versus revenues, and then overall financial statement, a financial statement around kind of the assets and liabilities for the organization. So she pulled apart in her report and kind of reflected on the universities that have different standing on those two measures. So some are actually managing cash flow really well, but they've got some capital debt on the books that they're having to manage. So right now, she really well laid out, you know, that largely most of the universities, they're managing their cash flow, and she's reflected that there, and some have more debt than others. One thing that I would observe is that generally our investment costs per student, that number that's quite different between Dalhousie versus the Atlantic School of Theology, is the one that got pulled apart a little bit that, you know, would have been observed, is that, of course, like there's overhead costs for all of these universities. And for, you know, Acadia with 5,000 students versus Atlantic School of Theology with less than 100 students, of course their overhead costs are going to look quite different. And our investment in order to support them, to sustain themselves, kind of has to reflect that. So, you know, we want a fine arts program in this province, which means NASCAT with a lower number of enrollment is going to cost us a little bit more per student in that way. So they're not apples to apples. So at this point, the financial health of all the organizations sits slightly different based on those two measures, cash flow and kind of overall financial statement. And they're all working really hard to kind of correct where they need to. And, you could pull out kind of news releases from over the years where certain universities have maybe gotten in trouble for one reason or another, lower enrollment than expected. So the immigration pathway, certainly, and I used to be the Associate Deputy Minister at Labor and Advanced Ed 7 years ago. It ended 7 years ago. At that time, finances were tight for universities. And then the immigration students came, and that actually lifted a lot of pressure because, CBU is an excellent example. I think they had better part of 8,000 international students, and that really changed the game for them. And CBU was really smart with that. They did a bunch of deferred maintenance. They paid down some debt. They, did all the good things that we would do in our household if we suddenly, for some reason, had higher than expected revenues. And so they kind of helped support themselves into the future. So every university has a slightly different position. The Auditor General did a really good job of capturing that. Some are in better health than others. This financial indicator suite that Cheryl went through is really the first time we've said we're actually setting a benchmark around what financial health looks like. So instead of you and I having a conversation and debating whether somebody's in good financial position or not, where are we trying to be with each of these measures? And then what do each of the universities need to do to get themselves within those parameters? Infrastructure is a perfect example. There is infrastructure that maybe is, I went to St. FX, there was a time there was a chemistry building that was kind of not used for much anymore, but it was taking up a fair amount of space and it had a lot of deferred maintenance. So they made a decision to invest in something new and get rid of that. So each of those infrastructure assessments will need to happen as they look at their overall financial health. So we're trying to get much better certainty with us all talking about the same thing as it relates to financial health. So these indicators are a tool in the toolbox as we keep going down that road.
MLA Mumbercat, please.
How much time do I have left, Madam Speaker?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. Okay, so I'll stay on the viability side because I think it's important because you're right. I'm a proud graduate of CBU, and I remember a time when there was 36 international or 60 international students at CBU, and now they had 8,000. And it represents a massive shift for that institution and others that are not going to see as many students. And as you said, really buoyed these institutions and helped them deal with a lot of the challenges that they would have had back then. Because I remember those times too. It was, cost of education is an issue. We could have that conversation another day, but particularly this, I go to the viability of the institutions, and I like for the government to come and want to do what they've done with Bill 12. It tells me that they want to have that ability because something is wrong, right? That's why Bill 12 came. So I guess my question is how, I'll start with the student side of it. How significant do you feel the changes in enrollment for international students are going to be? And do you feel that because of those changes, it's going to put some of these institutions' viability in serious jeopardy?
Deputy Barbrick.
Yeah, thanks for the question because it's an important context for not just Nova Scotia, but Canada right now. And I think we all are evaluating our current kind of federal election mandate around how might this change or not. Couple of things so absolutely, we did have a provision for about 20,000 international students in Nova Scotia. It's now dropped to about 18,000 and indications that it would be dropped further. And so that's a change in context that universities are having to respond to. But at the same time, we aren't filling that cap. So we're allowed to have 18,000 post-secondary students, international post-secondary students. We actually didn't hit 18,000 last year because there has been some brand damage to Canada as it relates to immigration. So, we work closely with Edgenova. That's an organization that's representing all universities who are doing a very concerted international recruitment that's focused on trying to repair the brand damage, because now there's an interpretation internationally that nobody's getting here anyway, so why would they bother? But we're actually not filling the seats that we have. So we had 18,000 for this year, and last year I think we only had 80,000 that we were allowed, the 20,000 that we were allowed. So we're trying to, and the universities are working closely together to do very focused strategies, because we can have more than we got last year, but we need to kind of fix that story a little bit, and kind of all of Canada is sort of focused on that area. And then the other piece of recruitment, there's the international recruitment, but marketing Nova Scotia as a university hub and the capacity within our 10, like we really are unique in the country. There is not another single province that has the per capita presence of universities than Nova Scotia. It is a competitive advantage for us, being able to recruit people here, recognizing it just in Halifax alone. There's not a single thing you couldn't study in the city, and in Nova Scotia more broadly, certainly CBU, St. FX, Acadia, St. Anne, like even the ability of the kind of rural connection and the university towns, that feel that maybe isn't quite the same in Halifax but sits in every other part of the province where there's a university, is also marketing Nova Scotia across the country as well as internationally, to make sure that everybody knows this province is a hub for post-secondary education.
MLA Barbrick.
Thank you, and that's interesting. That's the first I've heard that 60% that we haven't hit the cap. You wouldn't think that, right? Just based on and I'm in Cape Breton majority of the time, so I see the impact of what the students have done, not only for the success of the institution, but culturally and socially for our community too as well. It's been wonderful, and many stay, open businesses. There's a lot of great stories. I always say the community is kind of rebuilding itself like it did way back when. But I go back to the viability, and that is a concern if we're not hitting those caps or those targets. And you mentioned brand damage in that, and can you elaborate a little bit on what you're seeing, whether it's here across the province with the concerns that you have around the brand here in Nova Scotia?
Deputy Barbrick, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I just want to qualify that not hitting the caps. Recruiting for seats in university is like recruiting for anything else. You might start with 3 people interested in a job or 10 people interested in a job, and then as it gets closer to, there's only so many that are actually prepared to move here or have the things that they need to move here. So for the universities, they're in international recruitment, and they're working with how many of those students actually land in those seats. So it's not that everybody isn't working hard to fill those seats, it's that humans are complicated characters and we make decisions based on lots of things. So they're kind of, throwing a net wide, and then it narrows and narrows and narrows and narrows. So that's what they're kind of facing. The brand damage really is when Canada started to introduce caps, both for study permits, work permits. That kind of sends a message out there that maybe that is not such a viable direction. So it was, the reason those caps were introduced was because there was a feeling there wasn't sufficient supports for the students when they came in terms of housing and student supports and all of those things. So that became let's just be careful that we're not bringing students here that we can't support properly. So it all came from the right place. But in the process, of course, that sent a message out to the globe that you're then trying to overcome a little bit with time. So that's the Edgenova work. The universities themselves recruit, very concertedly, especially in particular countries that have shown an interest.
Order, please. The time for the Liberal caucus has elapsed, and now we'll move on to the PC caucus with MLA Outfit, please, for 20 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here today and your comments. It's very helpful. As an HRM-based MLA and former city councillor, housing is always a big interest to me. And I'm also wondering if that isn't part of the challenge with recruiting international students too, is either the perception of the lack of housing or indeed the cost of housing if it is available. So I'd be interested in that. But tell me about student housing. You touched on this a little bit in your comments about AST and SMU, but a little bit more elaboration on that, because it seems like the institutions are working to find solutions rather than leaving it to government. But can you just speak a little bit about what's going on and how that might be able to help us nationally and internationally?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thank you for the question. And I will start, and then Cheryl has lists and lists of all of the things that are happening. But one of the new provisions in the 24-25 bilaterals with each university was that they had to strive towards a goal of being able to accommodate on campus 15% of their student body, recognizing that a lot of students will go to market for an apartment elsewhere. A lot of students will stay home with their parents, oddly not mine. Not sure what that says. But there, 15% was the goal for each of the universities to achieve, and they each put in kind of mechanisms to try to get to that number, and we provided some support for some capital projects in the pursuit of that. And while we're not here to talk about NSCC today, they too have been working hard to provide some additional capacity. So if it's okay, Chair, Cheryl Toe probably can provide kind of a breakdown of those projects that are underway.
Ms. Toe.
Thank you. So as the deputy mentioned, we've been advancing a lot of work with our institutions to help increase housing. First off, though, I do want to say that in terms of the international student market, I think one of the big factors, and I'm sure housing is a factor, but I do think one of the big factors, again, is just the uncertainty. So, RCC has implemented so many different policy changes impacting, postgraduate work program, work permits for spouses. So it's just created a lot of uncertainty in the market, which has really impacted the brand of Canada, because as you can appreciate, picking up your life and moving to a whole new country where you don't have maybe any family or connections is a very big, significant move. And with the policies being so uncertain, certainly that has decreased interest in Canada as a post-secondary sector. But back to housing. So as the deputy mentioned, there has been multiple investments made by our institutions and by government. I know we're not here to talk about NSCC, but I did want to also identify, investments made in 7 new housing builds at NSCC campuses across the province. So in Pictou, Ivany and Akerley, which is in Dartmouth, Lunenburg, King's Tech, Cumberland, and the Institute for Technology campus here in Halifax. We're creating additional 620 new beds. So for 2 of these housing facilities, they did open this past year in September. So in Akerley and Pictou, we did provide 150 new living spaces. In terms of the Ivany campus, the 200 new beds are on track to be available for students starting in September 2025, and the other 4 housing projects are all in the planning and design phase. In terms of universities, we did support funding to support the Tartan Downs project in Sydney. So this funding will support phase 1 of the project to create 145 new beds in Sydney, of which 55 beds will be prioritized for post-secondary students. The deputy has already mentioned the Atlantic School of Theology. We also have invested $5 million to increase the provincial budget for the Affordable Housing Development Program to facilitate student housing project applications. So previously, this is a pre-existing program to help support the build of affordable housing in Nova Scotia, but we've never had a specific student dedicated stream. So this program will support the creation of affordable housing for students, so universities and nonprofit organizations can apply for forgivable loans and or mortgage loans as well to support more affordable student housing.
MLA Outfit.
Thank you very much. It's encouraging comments. The other, another matter that generates a lot of discussion, particularly internally, is tuition affordability in Nova Scotia. So I'm just wondering if there's any updates, recent developments that you can share with us on tuition, with 2 students in our family, so, and a professor.
Sorry, Deputy Barbrick.
Just let me hustle up some things here. Yeah, absolutely. So, last year there was a 2% cap placed on universities in terms of their opportunity to increase tuition. That at the time was recognizing that with inflation rates, things are changing. The department has, in my opening remarks, between the provincial student loan programs, Nova Scotia does have one of the most generous student loan programs in the country with a number of different programs. So the bursary program certainly gives every full-time student about $1,284 towards the cost of their year, and that's intended to offset the recognition of the tuition costs. Also, the loan forgiveness program for Nova Scotia students in Nova Scotia universities is quite a generous program, and Cheryl will be able to provide additional details to that. So we've continued, and we've recently increased the Nova Scotia student loan provision to recognize that housing has gone up, so we've done that in the past year. So we certainly continue to look at opportunities to make tuition more affordable. Each university has a combination of grant programs, some of which are supported by endowments that people will donate money to the university that they specifically want to use for bursaries, and each university is working really hard to maximize what they can do on top of what the province can do. And then, of course, between us and the federal government, there's about another $250 million in loans that have various forgivable kind of elements to them. So we continue to look for ways to make university as affordable as we can. And I think Cheryl probably has some additional details on some of the tuition programs.
Ms. Toe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, as the deputy mentioned, we do have a very generous Nova Scotia Student Assistance Program. It is a needs-based assistance that's eligible to all Nova Scotians who want to attend post-secondary, including universities. And it does work in alignment with the Canadian Student Financial Assistance Program, which we also administer on behalf of the federal government. So the deputy did mention the Nova Scotia Loan Forgiveness Program. So this does reduce the amount of provincial loan eligible borrowers must pay back after graduation. So graduates of undergraduate, certificate, and diploma programs of Nova Scotia universities and NSCC are automatically assessed for loan forgiveness for up to 5 years of study to a maximum of $20,400. So in 23-24, over 2,000 graduates benefited from the loan forgiveness program, which is approximately $10.8 million in provincial loans forgiven. I would also like to highlight, we offer a number of programs that help students who are in repayment, so after they've graduated, to help manage their repayment of loans. So we do have 2 programs, the Repayment Assistance Program and the 0% Interest Program. The Repayment Assistance Program assists student borrowers who are having difficulty repaying their student loans by providing them with affordable payments based on their income and also family size. So borrowers who have annualized income of less than $44,388 do not have to make any payments on any of their student loans. So during the 23-24 academic year, that program assisted more than 9,000 borrowers in Nova Scotia. In regards to the 0% interest, Nova Scotian students who choose to stay in Nova Scotia after graduation will pay 0% interest on their provincial portion of their student loan. loan. So this eliminates interest on provincial student loans for Nova Scotia residents who have graduated from a designated program. And then I'm pleased to say during 2024 that more than 6,800 student borrowers in repayment benefited from the 0% interest program.
Thank you both.
MLA Taggart?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this, I appreciate this. Has been very informative, and I think I'm very pleased with what I'm hearing. But I want to switch just a little bit because mostly we've been talking about university in general. I want to kind of key in on the healthcare part of our investments. So we all know how important training healthcare professionals is in supporting the labor market and filling essential jobs in the sector. Can you tell us what you're doing to support this and how successful you've been to date?
Deputy Barbrick.
Yes, I see there's a theme here. I have kind of a couple of things to say, and then Cheryl always has so much more detail. But one of the big provisions in the bilateral agreement that was a shift that I'm really pleased to report has worked for every single university is that we required that each university have 97% occupancy for all of their health programs. So there would not be vacant seats. There has to be a little bit of provision there because sometimes young people may change their minds on things. So, recognize they may start out in nursing and change their mind by November. And so they do need a little bit of buffer there. But every university with their health programs, all of their health programs, achieved 97% last year. And we did have a provision there for a holdback, an operating grant holdback, if they didn't make sure that those seats were filled. So that really incented everybody to get out to the high schools, get out to the community fairs for post-secondary, and really, really make sure that there was high awareness. And the part that is, I think, sometimes missed in the conversation around a third, you've heard lots of the operating grant from the province only covers a third of the costs for universities. But I would kind of argue that it's by the time you add all the student loan supports in that space and the targeted funding around specific projects, it's really closer to 2/3, but in the form of tuition support. So it's there's a few pieces of that pie, but through a combination of those incentives in the bilaterals and disincentives in the bilaterals, we really filled those seats up, which was terrific. We've also added significant amount of capacity in a couple of core health programs, recognizing the gaps in workforce. And I think a combination of there's employer-related retention efforts, but also tons of recruitment and making sure that we're growing a workforce that meets the future of Nova Scotia and ensuring that we provide every incentive we can to Nova Scotia students, whether they're from here or whether they come here for school, to want to stay in Nova Scotia to work. So there's been lots of stuff happen there. And I'm just going to ask Cheryl if she can fill in some of the specifics on additional seat capacity in a few different areas.
Ms. Toe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, acknowledge the member's comment that post-secondary certainly play crucial roles in training our healthcare professionals, but they also do conduct, cutting-edge research, and they foster medical advancements and innovation as well. And so, as the deputy mentioned in the 24-25 bilateral agreements, we did ask all of our institutions who offer health programming. So that's 5 universities: Acadia, Dalhousie, Cape Breton University, Mount St. Vincent University, and St. Francis Xavier University, to ensure that they filled at least 97% of their health seats. So I'm pleased to say that all, as the deputy mentioned, all schools have successfully met that goal, and actually they've exceeded that goal. So out of the 1,700 first-year seats across the 5 universities, they were managed to fill 107% of these seats. So they actually enrolled just a little over 1,800 students in these first-year health seats. And these seats include various programs. So includes Bachelor of Health Sciences in Diagnostic Medical Ultrasound, the Bachelor of Health Science in Radiological Technology, social work programs, Master of Nursing and Nurse Practitioner, as well as, Doctor of Dental Surgery. So these are just some examples of some of the programs that our institutions managed to fill and actually exceed in filling. The bilateral agreements also required increased data and reporting on on admissions and graduation rates to really fully understand the impacts and initiatives. So we'll continue that work in the next bilateral agreement. Also want to share some, very specific health education initiatives that our institutions have been advancing in support with the department in the last few years. I think the committee is well aware that nurses play a critical role in our healthcare system. So Acadia has partnered with CBU to offer a new nursing program that launched in September 2023. And then once fully operational, this program will be graduating an additional 63 nurses starting in August 2027. As well, along the nursing theme, I just wanted to highlight that since 2019-20, universities has responded to the need for more nurses to increase the number of first-year seats by 220, which is a 35% increase over that time period. So that's quite significant, and kudos to our universities for doing that. Also, I want to flag, again, the Premier announced in March 2023 the opening of a medical campus at CBU with a focus on rural family medicine in collaboration with Dalhousie. So really pleased to say that the new medical school campus will open in August and will have capacity for another 30 first-year Doctor of Medicine students, Nova Scotians, who will be studying with a focus on rural family medicine. And then lastly, I do want to highlight, the government's support and creation and launch in collaboration with Dalhousie, the new physician assistance program with an intake of 24 students starting in January 2024. The program is really the first physician assistance program in Atlantic Canada and one of only 4 in the country. So these are just kind of, high-level examples of all the work our institutions are doing to support, the healthcare system in Nova Scotia and really to benefit all Nova Scotians.
Thank you. MLA Burns, please.
Hi, thank you for coming out today. I have a question I want to reference the Auditor General's report on, and I can tie specifically back to these if you need to. I see in the report the recommendations and the responses that 3 of the items have been marked as completed. I just wonder if you can speak to how those were decided, were they a priority, and what the department has done to address those items.
I'm sorry. Deputy Barbrick. Oh, Ms. Toe.
Thank you.
Thank you, the member, for the question. So the Auditor General report did recommend that the department only disperse public funds to universities after agreements are signed by all parties. So this is one of the recommendations that the department has identified as complete in our response to the Auditor General recommendations. This was in specific reference to the 24-25 bilateral agreements, where there was a 6-week gap between the disbursement of the fund and the signing of the agreements. There was an administrative correction to the agreements, which was not substantive, but it did result in the delay of the agreements being fully executed. So funding for the operating grant was already sent to transactional accounting for processing, and unfortunately, just due to the timing and banking deadlines, we were unable to stop the electronic funds transfer. But, again, point taken, the department will ensure the bilateral agreements related to 25-26 and beyond are signed prior to any disbursement of funds to universities. The second recommendation that the department identified as complete was the recommendation that the department require funding agreements and with universities to include terms and conditions to address various items. So it was conflict of interest, the ability to audit, the assignment of interest earned on funds, the return of unused funds to the department, and measurable performance targets. So the recommendation for these terms and conditions were identified by the Auditor General in their March 2024 report on over budget spending, and therefore, as the Auditor General has noted in this report, the department started enhancing terms and conditions in funding agreements in 23-24. The department has created a new funding letter agreement template, which does include all of these terms and conditions, and will be using that template moving forward. And then the last recommendation that the department identified as complete is the recommendation related to monitoring funding agreements for compliance with terms and conditions and enforcing due dates for deliverables. So while the department has always monitored funding agreements for compliance, there was certainly room for improvement. So in particular, documentation of assessments of reporting received and ensuring when documentation was received was documented and saved to ensure we had the proof that deliverables were provided by the due dates from universities. So the department has formalized the process. We've created a standard email to receive all reporting to prevent the loss of proof of receipt if there was staff turnover. And we've also implemented a tracking system, including reminders that will be sent out to universities a few weeks in advance of deliverables being due. All that to say, I would say that the completed recommendations were really low-hanging fruit, so things that we were already working on to enhance and improve accountability prior to and during the audit field work of the Auditor General. And as noted in the department's response, we will advance work to complete the remainder of the recommendations by the target dates noted.
Order. The time for the PC caucus has elapsed perfectly. Okay, we're going to move on to our second round of questions, and each caucus will get 10 minutes. So we'll go back to the NDP caucus for 10 minutes. I recognize MLA Wozni.
Thank you, Chair. Looping back to some of the questions about healthcare-specific grants, we recognize the department's working to improve oversight of healthcare education funding. We do take note that the Auditor General flagged that the department does not and has not tracked graduation of candidates from these programs and how many of them remain in province upon graduation. When and how will the department begin tracking and reporting on how many Nova Scotian healthcare graduates remain in the province and working in our system?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thank you for the question. And as the pattern, I'll start out, and Cheryl will likely have additional information. But one of the things that we put in place since and kind of during the audit was happening is really a very structured steering group with our colleagues at Department of Health called the HEP unit. And I wish I had exactly what HEP meant to, but I bet you Cheryl will. And really that steering committee has been tasked with a number of things. One is enhancing post-secondary programming and establish new labor market needs assessments for kind of all health professionals. So that certainly has been happening based on the ground recognition that there was some critical gaps like radiation tech, medical lab tech, nursing, but a much more kind of structured approach to that. And then supporting when there are proposals come in from various post-secondary institutions with opportunities in the health space, that steering group is really who's doing the review of those proposals against labor market data, and then improving and monitoring admissions, enrollment, and retention rates. So that kind of steering committee was only set up about 4 months ago, and that will be the work of that steering committee is monitoring that. The second piece is the bilateral is a place where having universities report around enrollment is, a big potential space for us to marry the work of that HEP steering group and the university reporting under the bilaterals.
Ms. Toe, do you have anything to add there?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. So HEP does stand for Health Education Programs and Planning Unit. And so as noted on our response, this unit will be working with key partners, including the Office of Healthcare Professional Recruitment within the Department of Health and Wellness, to create a plan that advances the strategic health priorities of government. And also, as the Deputy mentioned, we will have been enhancing the collection of data and reporting from our institutions through the bilateral agreement. We also will be utilizing the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission, who collects a lot of data from our institutions in terms of graduation rates and so forth, to kind of leverage that data to help make more data-informed decisions. I also would like to highlight that the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission also does a graduate outcome survey every few years. So, the department does look at different data points. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to track students once they graduate. We do work with employers like Nova Scotia Health and IWK. For example, all students graduating from a nursing program in Nova Scotia are guaranteed a job with Nova Scotia Health or IWK or in the continuing care sector. So we know, at this time that, based on information collected by the Nova Scotia Colleges of Nursing, on average, 70% of our graduates of Nova Scotia's Bachelor of Science in Nursing programs from 2021 to 2022 to 23-24 were employed in the Nova Scotia healthcare sector. So we certainly are working with various partners to help track and better understand, where students or graduates are ending up. So that's something that we continue to work on.
MLA Wozni.
Yeah, I'm thankful for the remarks about enrollment and retention and graduating while students are students. But the Auditor General flagged that the department is almost entirely unaware of we're spending all of this money to graduate people to work in a healthcare system and doesn't really have any data to say whether or not that's actually translating into real human beings that are working in our system upon graduation. I know that you've flagged that it's very difficult to monitor where students go after they graduate, but it seems, given the government's insistence on accountability and transparency, that's a very important metric for the government to problem solve and triangulate immediately. Right, if we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to train healthcare graduates to solve a right now healthcare crisis, one of the key metrics that you're actually getting that job done is, are people staying? And I guess my question is a 70% retention rate at a time that we're fully funding tuition for students to go, are we okay with a 30% loss or attrition rate for new graduates? We've just paid for those people to get fully funded to graduate from nursing programs. Are we okay with 30% of them not practicing in Nova Scotia when they graduate? These are fundamental questions that measure the effectiveness of government spending that's targeted to address gaps in healthcare. And we're talking specifically about healthcare, but there are other high needs things as well. Teacher recruitment and retention similarly is a dire need. And tracking where those students land when they graduate is another priority. So I just flagged that as that's a dire need, and despite the fact that it's very difficult, that's a government job, not necessarily a job of universities, because the data collection isn't necessarily going to be, how are universities going to know how many of their students are employed, right? That data rests with employer after the fact. And those employers are also government funded. So it seems like the department probably needs to exert some influence over other partners or other stakeholders to collect that data so it knows that it has its met outcomes. I want to flow to a slightly different question. A lot of the focus here has been on accountability for how universities spend the money that governments disperse for university operations. But the Auditor General found that the allocation of operating grants is arbitrary, which is a pretty sobering word. And it continues to be based on a formula established over 25 years ago. I'm wondering if you can explain why this funding formula has not been updated for the past quarter century, And what has stopped the department from updating this formula for such a long period of time, such that there's really no rhyme or reason about who gets how much money and why?
Deputy Barbrick with 1 minute.
So I'm going to go back to the first. You spent quite a few minutes outlining an issue there with tracking, so I'm going to go back to that first. So there are a number of things in place to access data around the movement of students. One is return of service agreements. So we have those across a whole bundle. If Nova Scotia invests in the student to take that program, then a 2, 3, 5-year return of service, depending on the cost of the tuition, is happening now. The second part is Nova Scotia-based programs like the Nova Scotia Loan Forgiveness Program. If you are a Nova Scotia student in a Nova Scotia school and graduate, then there's kind of a generous forgiveness. There is an issue, and I hear you on this point, but people have choice. I have a 22-year-old daughter that's graduating from radiation science, is about to start work at Dartmouth General. She's going to make choice, and she's going to make choice about whether she chooses to answer questions about where she now works, as I do. St. FX calls me regularly. Dow calls me. I'm a graduate of all those schools, and Holland College and PEI. They all call me regularly to track kind of, what happened with you? I choose to answer the phone to that question or not. Tracking people without their consent or willingness is not a thing we're ever going to do. So we incent people. We do loans of service. We ask them to please provide us information about where they work in the future. If they're a licensed professional under a college, we sometimes have access to that information. But, there is always going to be an element of choice. So 30%, yeah.
Order, please. The time for the NDP has elapsed, and so now we'll move on to the Liberals with 10 minutes. MLA Mumbercat.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mentor. Congratulations to your daughter. That's wonderful stuff into the healthcare system. So I'm going to stay on the topic of university viability. And, one of the things that we've talked about today and what the Auditor General talked about was the amount of debt that universities are carrying. Have you done has the department done a jurisdictional scan around the levels of debt that universities are carrying here in Nova Scotia compared to other jurisdictions across the country?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thank you for the question. We have, and the Auditor General, we had quite a detailed conversation about that recommendation around a funding formula that is kind of predictable, that is based on a combination of variables like students, program costs, overhead costs. So we've been digging into that for a while. It doesn't exist in the country. There isn't a formula-based program for operations funding in the country, and it's because it's really hard to develop a formula that will apply as we kind of emerge into new programs, and some programs are more expensive and less, and Nova Scotia-based kids versus other parts of the country versus international, and your kind of policy position on some of those things. So we, the conversation with the Auditor General is, we agree that is something that we would love to be able to develop. And so we're not just looking across Canada, because every province is grappling with this. We are all, pick up any kind of university-based newsletter or kind of particularly faculty connected to that. This is a conversation that's alive and well, and I walk my dog every morning, and I could listen to a podcast on university sustainability every single day from different parts of the world as we try to figure this out. So there isn't a formula. Every province is trying to kind of figure out how we manage this. The formula that exists is outdated, and since then, it has been a plus or minus increased based on various kind of circumstances that have kind of happened over the last number of years, and operating funds against CPI rates and some of those other variables. So I think it is the holy grail of university funding, is to have that kind of a very prescribed formula. It is possibly the case that there would be winners and losers in that kind of a formula. So, you know, the conversation we had with the Auditor General was, as we go down that road of looking at what that formula could be, there's going to be some very complex things as part of the conversation that we would need to dig into. But it is outdated, and we've been dealing with a CPI kind of conversation since then, and probably needs a refresh. And we've agreed to her recommendation on that.
MLA Membercat.
Yeah, thank you. And no, it is an interesting conversation. Just based on, you talked about programs, different programs, varying programs in universities, and now you're looking at degree granting status for NSCC, which will be interesting to talk about as that rolls out too as well, because those articulation agreements have changed a lot over the years. I had the opportunity to work at CBU and NSCC, so before I got into politics. So they're both fantastic institutions, and you're starting to see more of a collaboration than ever before between them. So again, on the viability, and this is, I brought this up earlier, and I'll really just kind of ask the department's opinion on this, because it is something, and you mentioned that you use CBU as an example. They had a big influx of international students. As a result of that, revenue was there, so they used it towards deferred maintenance, capital projects, the things that the institution wanted to do. But I think that we don't talk about the deferred maintenance side enough. Like, I remember being on the board of CBU years ago, and deferred maintenance was talked about by staff, saying, you know, and the message to the board at the time was like, we can't let these projects be held off forever. So is the government, in your opinion, do you see any red flags when it comes to certain infrastructure projects in the universities now? And is the government looking at supporting providing additional support to try to deal with some of those deferred maintenance things? Because when the Auditor General brings this stuff up, and you know, there's issues around deferred maintenance, there's issues around, you know, potential safety issues with infrastructure. It's something that we can't not talk about. So, in your opinion, through you, Madam Chair, do you see any significant red flags right now in the university system here at the province when it comes to deferred maintenance?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thanks for the question. There's no doubt that deferred maintenance, when operating dollars are tight, is a challenging thing to stay on top of. And the combination of funding that involves the universities right now, both that kind of operating grant, there are other revenue streams, and some of our targeted funding projects that have been kind of in the space of, you know, Acadia's new nursing school and CBU's new med school, and some of those things are, and MSVU's new doctorate in psychology. So as we do those things, capital money has been included in those projects so that they can kind of, you know, renovate pieces of buildings where they're going to host those things, so we can help in that way. And then the universities, of course, are always assessing their own infrastructure about how to, you know, the sequence of which they need to kind of monitor and move forward on their projects. The piece about the financial indicators and having consistency on what we're looking at and how is going to reflect some of that issue. So right now, to the AG's report around, you know, there's two graphs in there. One is the universities in terms of cash flow, their movement of expenses revenue annually, and then their overall balance sheet. And so she reflects the variation in those health, and that overall balance sheet does hold some of their deferred maintenance costs. So it's pretty decently reflected, and it will be something we have to keep grappling with. I think the way that we kind of invest in targeted funding to make sure that universities can meet the future needs of the workforce that we need here, that's the opportunity for us to help with some of those infrastructure projects at the same time.
MLA Membercat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And how much time do I have left? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Okay, I'm going to get a question and an answer in. So ultimately for me today was really about just talking about the viability of our institutions, because it's something that is a concern for all of us. You hear on the street, you hear certain things. You see the reduction in international, the reduction, but then you find out that we're not hitting the cap, and that there's a perception out there that we need to all work on in our communities. It's not just about the universities, but it's about the communities too as well. I will ask the question around NSCC and the degree granting status. So, which is great. I think I've had the opportunity, as I said, to work there. They do a lot of work around, we heard yesterday in committee, the work that they're doing around seniors long-term care, the work they do around education, early childhood development when it comes to daycares. So can you give me, I guess, how is that going to roll out? Like, has there been decisions made, and this goes to the viabilities of universities as part of the report, because ultimately when you have articulation agreements that students may decide to go 2 years at NSCC, which in turn would not go 2 years. I'm just using examples because there are articulation agreements in place when it comes to business, when a student can go to NSCC for 2 years and finish their degree at a university for 2 years. So has that conversation been decided on how that's going to roll out at this point, and how is that going to impact the universities?
Deputy Barbrick with 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to talk about that. So back to the Bill 12 really was, what tools do we need in the toolkit into the future to make sure that we can meet the needs of students and workforce in this province in the upcoming years. So it was the opportunity to do what is it that we may need to do. And that was, this is a possible tool in the toolkit. We will not be going down the road of degree granting authorities for NSCC without a very targeted approach. So, for instance, geographies in the province where there is a bit of a university desert, even though we have many, many universities here, there are parts of the province that universities are a lot more inaccessible than others. And just, students that don't have the opportunity to go live elsewhere and pay for housing costs and all of that sort of thing. So the NSCC piece is, if in a very targeted...
Order, please. I'm sorry. I said I would never apologize for cutting people off, but it is really hard. Okay, I'm sorry, the time for the Liberals has ended, and so we'll go to the PC caucus for 10 minutes. MLA McLeod.
Deputy, do you want to finish your thought there?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thanks for that, and I understand your time management needs. So I guess I want to, because that, people were concerned about that. Are we going to undercut the universities? Are we going to sort of put a particular degree program at NSCC, and then the universities are negatively impacted by that? It's a tool in the toolkit that would be used very carefully and in a very specific way. So if we have parts of the province where inaccessible access to post-secondary is a barrier from the success of that community, and NSCC in partnership with a university or some such thing provided access for young people, then we would use that in concert and partnership with the people that kind of all work in this business. So we're not rolling out anything tomorrow that's going to undercut the universities. This is if we need to do this in the upcoming years to ensure we can meet the needs of the workforce and young people in this province, then we will carefully use that tool.
MLA McLeod.
Thank you. Recently in the news, Mount St. Vincent had made an announcement about a new program. I think it was a doctorate in psychology program that was and as part of the program, there's also going to be a training clinic where members of the public could receive some treatments. Now, looking through this lens of accountability and some performance targets, what was the department's involvement in this, and what benefits will Nova Scotians see?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thanks. That's a great one to talk about because it demonstrates the power of the post-secondary community in conjunction with provincial needs and the relevant departments that have the best line of sight to care needs or service needs. So in that case, the communities are lacking access, and there has been a ton of investment to try to provide access to mental health supports. So the recognition that there is a doctorate in psychology for more complex needs, and there's also a master's in psychology for sort of varying levels of needs. Things that are more complex require a higher level of expertise. And so MSVU already offers a master's in psychology. So this was a partnership between the Office of Mental Health and Addictions, Department of Advanced Ed, and Mount St. Vincent around an opportunity there to create a program around a doctorate of psychology that builds on the faculty expertise they already have for their masters. And wouldn't it be great if there's actually a clinic there so that the general public can access that clinic and the faculty are in teaching, in their teaching role, and the students are able to access that learning environment for both their master's and their doctorate arrangement. So this, they're starting the work now. We just kind of signed the partnership deal, so to speak. They're in the development now. They have to build the curriculum, so they'll do that this year. And by September of next year, they will do their first intake of these students, and the clinic will be up and running, and that service will be available to the public. So they've estimated that, and they're focused on children and youth. So their intention is that they will be able to support a couple of hundred patients annually and create that teaching environment for their students.
MLA McLeod. Oh, MLA Timmins, please. MLA Timmins.
Thank you for that. It's very interesting over the years with education institutes and students that were taking nursing or going into a doctor, and be able to have that practical at the same time really encourages a good outcome at the end. So thank you for that. I know you've answered a lot of my questions that I had written down, and I appreciate that. If you can maybe, you talked about getting involved in speaking towards Bill 12, and you talked to universities. Can you explain the process that you have done to reach out to the universities and speak about that a little bit?
Deputy Barbrick, please.
Thank you. So there was 5 different elements of that bill. Some of them were proclaimed upon the House being wrapped up, and some of them have some runway to do in development. So the piece about the university board governance really was regulatory authority to develop regulations in partnership with the universities. So we've already been in contact with them. They have their own interests and things that they want to achieve with that, and different order, because we'll stage out when those regulations come in place so that they can kind of lever back their existing board and kind of bring in their new boards, and there's a time and a way to do that that's the least disruptive. So we've already started in the conversations about the sequence of that and how we'll go about the reg development. The regulatory development is really intending, there wasn't regulations on board governance for universities. They have their own bylaws, of course, and they have a very robust processes, so that's not to suggest they haven't been, but kind of standardized provincial approach so that boards are operating similarly. They have similar kind of risk management mitigations in place and conflict of interest positions in place, so we bring some consistency to that. It has the Act kind of sets the skeleton of the frame. The regs will do the individualized piece with each university. based on kind of their needs and our needs. And then we'll start to move those regulations forward. So they will be ministerial regulations. The kind of board appointments would be kind of move forward from there. So, the earliest board that may make the adjustment is in the upcoming year, and then there'll be 2 more blocks. So we'll do it in phases of 3, and we're working closely with the universities on that.
MLA Timmons.
That. I'm just going to change the subject a little bit. How is Nova Scotia unique in regards to the university's economic performance and status?
Deputy Barbrick.
Thank you. I'll start, and then Cheryl will likely have some detail. But again, the uniqueness of Nova Scotia is, in our small province of 1 million people, we have 10 universities, high-quality universities, that each have their own unique elements and tend to focus more in one area or the other. So we're unique in that. The bilateral agreements are also unique, this kind of journey that we've been heading on and trying to really capitalize on the asset and opportunity we have in these universities for this province. So, of course, if any of the university presidents were here with us, they would view themselves as being a 3-legged stool. They've got a provincial mandate and intent that they want to support and recognizing Nova Scotia as their home. They've got a national presence, and they recruit students from across the country and hold national recognition. And then they have an international component. So what we are trying to blend is that these are Nova Scotia investments. So our $700 million is Nova Scotia's contribution to this university context. So that recognition that we are looking to marry the needs of this province as well as the leverage and asset that we have in the universities is very unique. The fact that we are going to start measuring with a very common set of indicators as we move down this road of accountability, recognizing that they are board-governed independent organizations and trying to connect the dots between the governance arrangement and really what is a primary investor. We are a primary investor. So we have a partnership in that, and Nova Scotia is unique, and the universities themselves work very closely together. They meet, I think, every couple of weeks. They look to resolve things themselves. They form amazing partnerships in some of the articulation agreements, the recognition of learning from each of the institutions, porting into another institution. They've done that really well so that there's not barriers to students. If they do a year at Mount St. Vincent and they want to go to Dal, we want to make sure that none of that time is lost, and they work really well together on that.
Order, please. The time for questioning has elapsed, so I would like to see if our guests would like to make any final closing remarks. Deputy Barbrick?
Yeah, I have no written remarks, so I'm off book. That might be nervous. So just building on the recognition of what's so unique about this province and the partnership between the government investment and the universities and how much we value them. Bill 12 was not intended to be swinging a big bat. Bill 12 asked the question of what might we need in the upcoming years to make sure that this investment is sustainable, and we're all on top of that so that Nova Scotia students and Nova Scotia taxpayers are well represented and can feel comfortable that we are collectively on it. That was the goal. We have 100% respect for these organizations. They are a huge asset to this province, and we will continue to work on exceptional relationships for the sake of Nova Scotian students.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Deputy Barbrick and Ms. Toe, and you are free to go. We'll just take a 3-minute recess, please, and then we'll be back. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So I will call the meeting back to order. And we do have a number of items of business on the agenda. The first one is the endorsement of the Auditor General recommendations. So it is a practice of the Public Accounts Committee to endorse the recommendations of the Auditor General. And we have two endorsements that need to be done. One is for the 2024 report of the Auditor General the financial report, and the second one is the 2025 funding to universities report. So I am wondering if someone would put forward a motion to endorse, firstly, the recommendations from the 2024 financial report. I recognize Emily McLeod.
I move that the Public Accounts Committee formally accept and endorse recommendations contained in the 2024 report of the Auditor General Financial that have been accepted by the audited departments or agencies, and ask that those departments and agencies commit to and take responsibility for full and timely implementation of the recommendations accepted by those departments and agencies.
Thank you, Emily McLeod. We need a seconder, right? No. We don't need a seconder. Is there any discussion on that motion? Okay, so we'll take it to a vote. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? The motion is carried. And then now I will ask for a motion to endorse the recommendations from the Funding to Universities report of the Auditor General. Emily Burns.
I move that the Public Accounts Committee formally accept and endorse the recommendations contained in the 2025 report of the Auditor General funding to universities that have been accepted by the audited departments or agencies, and ask that those departments and agencies commit to and take responsibility for full and timely implementation of the recommendations accepted by those departments and agencies.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on that motion? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. So all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is the the record of decisions from the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedures, which the record of decisions is in your package. At the end. And so, we met the subcommittee met on March 26th, and members have been provided with the record of decisions. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the record of decision as presented. This is the agenda setting. I will just give you a moment to take a look, and I'll wait for a moment. Order. I'm going to have to keep moving here. So if we don't have a motion to accept them all as presented, then we'll have to go one by one. So I will ask for someone to make a motion on the first topic, which is the topic is the Halifax Infirmary Expansion Project, the witnesses being the CEO of the Nova Scotia Health Authority, the Deputy Minister of Health and Wellness, the Executive Director of Build Nova Scotia, and a representative from PCL Construction. Do I have a person to move that? Emily Mumbercat. Is there any discussion? Emily Taggart.
This is an audited report by the Auditor General?
No, Emily Taggart. These are the subcommittee. These are the agendas that proposed that are outside of the Auditor General. So you will recall that the committee does review other topics that are to do with the finances and the accounts of the province. And so we've done this in collaboration with the department, with the Auditor General. All the caucuses have submitted topics. The subcommittee debated the topics, and these are the ones that came forward after the subcommittee looked at them. So this should be a matter of simple business. I will take a 2-minute recess, so you can. One moment. I think I'll just take a 2-minute recess for people to discuss with their caucuses, and we'll come back in 2 minutes. Order, please. We're back in the meeting, and I would like to say that there seems to be some willingness to go back to accepting all of the decisions, record of decisions as one. So, but there is a motion on the floor, and I need unanimous consent. I need to ask the MLA Barbrick to ask for unanimous consent to take back his motion.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I do ask through you to the committee for unanimous consent to remove my motion to approve topic 1.
Yes. Thank you. Is there unanimous consent to remove MLA Barbrick's motion? Wonderful. Great. So now, do I have a motion to accept the record of decision as one as presented? MLA MacLeod.
I make a motion to accept these decisions as presented.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? MLA Taggart.
I want to go back. Sorry, thank you. I just want to go back to discussions we had some time ago in this committee about, with the Auditor General, about us adding work to her staff and her ability to do fulsome audits on each of these subjects, because as I recall last year, we kept presenting subjects that we wanted, that we wanted to discuss at this committee, and she didn't have the ability. And so what we were really doing is having a discussion that appeared to be an audited report but was not. So I guess my first question, is the Auditor General aware of this and supportive of it?
Well, I can answer that for sure. The Auditor General is aware, and in fact, all these topics were submitted to the Office of the Auditor General. They collated the topics and then presented them with suggested witnesses. So they've been involved with the process the whole way through. But I will recognize the clerk for some clarity.
So, of course, the Auditor General's office, unfortunately, a representative couldn't be here today. They are off at meetings, their executive team. Firstly, the committee has always looked at non-Auditor General topics. Always, well, except for a brief period, but almost always, I guess. So that's not unusual. I think the issue that the Auditor General has raised is not with the non-AG related topics. Her issue was with providing briefings for the non-AG report topics. So that's where the issue is, and I think she will be discussing that at some point in the future. Gordon?
I recognize Mr. Hebb.
And part of that discussion was the committee asking the Auditor General to do an audit other than what the Auditor General had come up with on her own.
I recognize the clerk.
I guess that's it. Just to the point about actual Auditor General reports, she advises me of when she's going to be releasing a report, and then that date is just basically worked in our schedule. So I usually know well in advance when that's going to be happening so that it can be booked in our schedule as we move forward.
Emily Taggart, are you satisfied? Emily Taggart.
I just want to explain, I guess, my rationale here is that often those reports are considered by the press and by the public as audited reports. So it's my understanding these are public accounts meetings that don't involve the Auditor General. Is that correct?
No, it's not quite correct. The Auditor General generally is always at public accounts and can answer questions if need be. But I just want to reiterate that these topics are put forward by the caucuses, so by your colleagues. Same as any other committees, but in this case, they go to the Auditor General for review. The Auditor General's office reviews them, sort of collates them. So if there's two topics from two different caucuses that are sort of the same, then she will say, well, what if we, combine it and call it this? And then proposes or suggests witnesses. So literally is involved with every step of the process except for sort of coming up with the topics, and will also let us know if something doesn't seem like it really is in the purview of the Public Accounts Committee and might be better at a Health Committee or the Natural Resources Committee. So I feel confident, as someone who's been on the committee for quite many years and also as the chair of the process, and know that she is involved in all of it, and know that the topics, like as the clerk said, the topics do not supersede actual Auditor General reports. They're slotted into, as it were, empty spaces in the schedule. Emily Taggart, we have 4 minutes left.
Does this require unanimous consent?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Require consent? Thank you.
No, it requires a majority vote.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there is a motion on the table, and I will call, unless there's any other discussion, I will call for the vote. So all in favor of the motion as presented by Emily McLeod? Aye. Anyone opposed? Aye. The motion is passed. Thank you very much. Now on the agenda, there is a a housekeeping item about the jurisdictional scan that was requested by MLA McLeod. You'll recall that there was a motion passed to conduct a scan of how frequently other public accounts committees meet. The scan was received and distributed. However, this was the first opportunity to put it on the record that it was received. So that's all I'm doing. And you all have it now. Next is just the next meeting date. So unless there is any other business, I will just say that the committee business has been concluded, and our next meeting is April 16th, 2025, and it's an in-camera meeting with the Office of the Auditor General, and the topic is the 2025 report of the Auditor General, the follow-up reports of 2020, 2021, 2022 performance audit recommendations. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.